further ado, we'll have our first talk, which is conjoint analysis as a tool for generating items for personality measures.
Dear colleagues, I'm happy to present today my research devoted to conjoint analysis as a tool for generating items for personality measures. This research started as an attempt to find some systematic way to construct personality items for our measures, because as maybe you know, personality measures often considered to be more the art than science. So my problem was to find some theory to construct structure for personality scales. And there are some existing approaches to do that. For instance, facet theory of Louis Gutmann, or choice experiments, or survey experiments, situational questionnaires, or situational judgment tests. To me, as a person who has experience in analysis of market and research data, conjoint experiments was an approach that seems very promising. Conjoint analysis, it's a survey-based technique that allows market research to help determine what attributes or features of individual products is more important for their preferences. Usually, to conduct such analysis, you select important attributes of product, define their levels, construct stimuli as combination of attributes, and let participants to rate, rank, or sort such stimuli, and then using conjoint analysis technique to build individual and group models that allows us to model preferences and analyze those situational ingredients that are more important to each person. So when I used first conjoint analysis, an idea struck me. Maybe situational questions from personality scales may be constructed in the same way as market research questionnaire. So I tried to construct scale for measuring intensity of emotions in different contexts. For instance, I take 11 emotions such as stage fright, feeling of injustice, envy, joy, anger as response variable akin to preference or importance in marketing research. And as situational attributes, I took two binary situational features or salient ingredients that can be used to describe behavioral context. For instance, if we if we study stage fright, we can describe a situation by size and familiarity of audience. For instance, for me, this audience is large and unfamiliar, and maybe that's why stage fright for me is so great.
Alexander, I'm sorry, but could you wrap up in the next 15 seconds?
Okay. I constructed 44-point questionnaire using a conjoint plan that is shown on the screen now, and collected data using 11 blocks of 4 items each. In each block, a person can describe intensity of emotions using 2-level 9-point scale. And later we can analyze those data as signatures or behavioral profiles.
I'm sorry to cut you off, but at this stage you do need to move on. If you're able to come to a social event on the GatherTown platform this afternoon, I'm sure there will be people who would love to hear more about your talk and about the final sections that you weren't able to complete here. I'm so sorry, but just to be fair to the others, we do need to move on.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Okay, so our next talk is personality growth in reaction to relationship loss, changes of perceived control before and after separation, divorce, and the death of a partner.
Hi, thank you for being here. Can you see my screen? Okay, hopefully. I would like to present you some new findings about changes in perceived control in the years before and after relationship losses, namely separation, divorce, and the death of a partner. We know that perceived control crucially affects how we deal with our life. It impacts how well we feel, how healthy we are, and how we master different challenges in our lives. At the same time, we know that perceived control is susceptible to change. For instance, studies on age-graded changes found that perceived control increases in young adulthood, remains relatively stable in middle adulthood, and then decreases again in old age. Researchers also agree that social relationships, especially romantic relationships, play a very important role for perceived control. For example, stable and secure relationships seem to have beneficial effects and have been associated with higher perceived control. Despite all these findings, we know little about how the end of romantic relationships affects perceived control. So in this study, we examined how perceived control changes from 5 years before until 5 years after relationship losses, including separation, divorce, and the death of a partner. We used data of the Socioeconomic Panel Study, a large and nationally representative household panel study from Germany. The study started in 1984 and is still ongoing. In the ZEBs, relationship losses were assessed yearly, and perceived control was measured from 1994 until 1999. In the analysis, we considered people who had experienced the respective loss between 1991 and 1999, and we coded the time point of their loss relative to the time point of the respective assessment of perceived control. We then applied multi-level analysis and combined within it between person information, which provided us with fine-grained information on perceived control in the years before and after the respective loss. We conducted separate analysis for internal and external control beliefs, and our main findings were as follows. First, we found that for separation, external control beliefs were higher in, but not after the first year of being separated. That is, separation was followed by a transient decrease of perceived control that attenuated in the long run. In terms of internal control beliefs, we found that internal control increased gradually after separation. And for the death of a partner, we even found stronger effects, namely that internal control beliefs were higher in, and especially after the first year of widowhood. For divorce, we did not find any changes in perceived control in the surrounding years, and we also did not find that perceived control already started to change in the years before the respective loss experience. Taken together, these findings suggest that specific relationship losses, especially separation and the death of a partner, seem to be followed by a long-term increase of perceived control. And possibly this is because people make the experience that they are able to overcome even these very stressful experiences in the long run, which might strengthen perceived control. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Eva. I just want to say, personally, I really enjoyed that talk. Okay, so our third presentation is on the development and correlated change of narcissism and self-esteem in adulthood.
Yeah, hi everyone. In my talk, I will present data on the development and correlated change of narcissism and self-esteem. A long-standing issue in research on narcissism is its relationship with self-esteem. And not only has self-esteem been considered as an important component in theoretical accounts of narcissism, but empirical evidence too indicates that narcissism is at least moderately associated with self-esteem. The relationship between narcissism and self-esteem, however, has been most commonly investigated from a cross-sectional perspective, and far less is known about both constructs' longitudinal associations. Hence, the aim of our multi-sample longitudinal study was to investigate the co-development of grandiose narcissism and self-esteem, and thereby to examine whether change in narcissism is related to change in self-esteem. Our first study used 3 waves of data spanning a time period of 6 years, and the sample consisted of about 1,200 participants from early to late adulthood. The correlated change of narcissism and self-esteem was investigated by simultaneously estimating 2 latent true intra-individual change models, one for narcissism and one for self-esteem. This approach provides then estimates about the cross-sectional association between narcissism and self-esteem, as well as about the extent to which change in narcissism is proportional to change in self-esteem. Results. As depicted, there was a significant cross-sectional correlation between narcissism and self-esteem. However, all cross-domain correlations, including latent change scores, were non-significant, suggesting that at least in our sample, global narcissism and self-esteem developed mainly independently. Study 2. In the first study, narcissism was conceptualized as a one-dimensional construct. However, narcissism has also been shown to have multiple facets. The narcissistic admiration rivalry concept, for example, differentiates between 2 dimensions of narcissism, admiration and rivalry. Both dimensions have been shown to be differentially related to self-esteem, with admiration showing primarily positive associations and rivalry showing primarily negative associations with self-esteem. Hence, the aim of study 2 was to provide a deeper understanding of the correlated change of narcissism and self-esteem by taking account of these 2 dimensions. We used 2 waves of data spanning a time period of 2 years and including approximately 10,000 participants in early to middle adulthood. And we applied the same statistical approach as in study 1, with the only difference that we simultaneously estimated 3 true intra-individual change models, one for admiration, one for self-esteem, and one for rivalry. Results. We found that both admiration and rivalry were significantly related to self-esteem cross-sectionally, with admiration showing a small positive association and rivalry showing a negative correlation. Additionally, we also found a small positive association between change in admiration and change in self-esteem, indicating that individuals who increased or decreased in admiration also increased or decreased in self-esteem. Change in rivalry, however, was unrelated to change in self-esteem. Conclusion. In summary, the evidence of our study suggests that despite being cross-sectionally associated, narcissism and self-esteem develop mainly independently in adulthood. And in our two samples, we found only change in narcissistic admiration to be positively associated with change in self-esteem. This correlation, however, was rather weak and may not necessarily be considered as substantial. An interesting implication of our study concerns the mechanisms and processes underlying the development of narcissism and self-esteem. And in this respect, our findings suggest that both constructs' development is very unlikely to be influenced by the same causal mechanisms. And instead, it seems that more specific and narrowly acting mechanisms affect change in narcissism and self-esteem largely independently. Thank you for your attention and feel free to contact me.
Thank you so much. Okay, we're moving on. Our next talk is Conservatives do not see the world as more dangerous than liberals, and decades of political research showing otherwise can be explained.
All right, can you see me? Great. And here is my screen. Okay, so thank you for this chance to chat. My name is Jared Clifton. I study psych at the University of Pennsylvania, and I do stutter a little bit, so I appreciate your patience with that. So dangerous world belief is a general belief about the world as a whole. I study beliefs like this, and I study 26 of these beliefs, but dangerous world belief specifically has been known to correlate with political conservatism. I think that you can consider it a foundational relationship in the political psych space. The pairwise R is typically about 0.3. And the consensus interpretation of this relationship is causal. So belief in a dangerous world is thought to describe two perceived worlds in which opposite political behaviors make sense. So we need to keep out immigrants because the world is a dangerous place. We need to spend more money on the military and police and stuff like this because the world is a more dangerous place than liberals believe. The problem is that the measure that's been used to show this finding seems to have misled us, perhaps. So we just found out that dangerous world belief actually has 7 dimensions to it, and 2 studies, including a pre-registered replication, now show that the scale that we used to use highlights exactly the 3 ways that conservatives see the world as a dangerous place and neglects the one big way that liberals see the world as a dangerous place, which is liberals tend to see the world as full of injustice. So we tried to use a more balanced measure, and we looked at 8 samples so far, some of which are somewhat large. And we found the pattern really no matter what conservative versus liberal measure we use. So we've looked at social conservatism, attitudes towards Trump, and so on and so forth. And this is the pattern. So what we see is these are all 26 world beliefs that we know of. And what we see is on the bottom, there's most of them are not correlated to political ideology. ology. 5 of them are a little bit, 5 of them are a little bit more, and then there's one big one that's doing a lot more work than the rest. So the world beliefs that are essentially uncorrelated include all of these at the bottom, including the belief that the world is a dangerous place. This was a bit of a shock to us. We thought with a better measure, we could anyway, we were surprised that it explained less than 1% of the variation. World beliefs that are slightly correlated include the belief the world is interconnected, which liberals tend to see the world as. Conservatives tend to see the world as more just. But the big one is the belief that the world is fundamentally and inherently a hierarchical place. So what we're finding is basically we've fundamentally misunderstood the worldview differences of conservatives versus liberals. Conservatives don't really see the world as a more dangerous place. They see the world as a place where differences matter, where things really are different than one another. And this doesn't just apply to people, it applies to plants and animals and and all things. So this might inform if you assume that a difference matters when you see the difference between sex, that might matter. The difference between nations, that might matter as well. Thanks for your time. If these findings are of interest to you, please reach out to me and I'd love to talk to you more. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much, Joe. Okay. Moving on, our next presentation is Educational Mobility and Personality Development During the Transition to University.
Sorry, I was sharing my screen. I could not see myself anymore. Let me check. Share screen. Okay. I think it's working right now, right? Okay. Hi, I'm Manon van Scheppingen, and today I'm going to talk about educational mobility and personality development during the transition to university. I'm an assistant professor at Tilburg University, and I'm doing this project together with Anatolia Batroug. She's a social class researcher from the University of Lausanne. So in this paper, we studied moving up in educational level compared to your parents. In other words, being a first generation student might lead to personality change. So the difference with other studies that focus on the transition to university is that we take parental education level into account. We have 2 research questions. So the first is, does personality predict upward educational mobility? And the second one is, does upward educational mobility trigger changes in personality? So to study this question, we used a youth sample of the German socioeconomic panel study that Eva also mentioned already. So when a person turns 17 in this study and is part of the household that's also part of the study, they are asked to complete the personality questionnaire. So from this bigger sample, we selected individuals that had longitudinal data on personality. From time interval was up to 10 years. And for whom the educational level and also the educational level of their parents was known. We measured personality, the big 5 personality traits, risk-taking, and locus of control. So from this sample, we created 4 subsamples. So the first one was the upward mobility sample. This upward mobility sample consists of individuals who entered university between their first and last personality measurements and whose parents did not hold a university degree. So this is the treatment sample in this study. Then we have the stable low sample. This consists of individuals who did not enter university and whose parents did not hold a university degree. So this is the control sample in the study. We also selected 2 other samples, so the downward mobility sample and stable high sample, but I don't have time to get into those right now. So I will focus on the upward mobility and stable low sample in this presentation. But if you want to know more about those other samples, you can always contact me, of course. So to study selection effects, we looked at personality differences between the upward mobility and stable low sample at age 17, so before the transition to university. And socialization effects, so changes in personality, were studied by looking at differences in personality change during the transition to university using latent growth curve modeling. For the second question, we use propensity score matching to control for pre-existing differences between the two subsamples. We controlled for parental background variables, but also adolescent background variables and other important confounders such as study length. And what's also included here is the personality measure at the first time point, so it's at age 17 as a matching variable. So the answer to the first question, does personality predict upward educational mobility? The short answer is yes. We found differences in openness, in risk-taking, and in internal locus of control. So the upward mobility group scores higher on openness and has a more internal locus of control compared to the stable low group before the transition to university. And they score lower on risk-taking before this transition. So the answer to the second question, does upward educational mobility trigger changes in personality? You might see some differences here in extraversion and openness, but the short answer is no, because we didn't find large differences. So all these differences are very small. And they show no significant linear slopes, so they are not significantly different from each other. So, but if you want to know more about these small differences, you can contact me, of course. So that's it. Thank you for listening. So please do not hesitate to contact me if you want to know more about propensity score matching or about other groups.
Thank you so much, Madam. Okay, our next talk is Revisiting the Power to Forgive, a dialectic approach on power, self-esteem, and forgiveness in romantic relationships.
Yes, hello. We are a team of German and Israeli researchers and studied associations between power, self-esteem, and forgiveness in romantic relationships. Already 90 years ago, Gandhi stated, "The weak can never forgive. Forgiveness is an attribute of the strong." We considered the strong as a powerful and tested whether the statement holds in romantic relationships. Power is typically understood as social influence. Forgiveness has several levels. We focused on offense-specific forgiveness. This means forgiving a specific transgression. Past research demonstrated that power has pro- and antisocial consequences, also in close intimate relationships. However, we expected a positive association with forgiveness because in couples, there's typically high commitment, and according to the situated focus theory of power, power can increase pro-social behavior when this is the goal of the actor. Forgiving can be understood as taking control and abandoning the role of a victim. And actually, past research found a positive relation to forgiveness. We wanted to test this relation in two different cultures with highly powered sample sizes in a dyadic setting and to test self-esteem as mediator. Power has been repeatedly reported to increase self-esteem, and self-esteem is positively related to forgiveness. Self-esteem may protect people against taking transgressions personally. In line with dyadic power theories, we also took the interdependence of both partners in a relationship into account and tested whether the power of the actor affects the outcomes of the partner. We collected data of German and Israeli opposite-sex couples. We used the personal sense of power scale to measure the perceived ability to influence a relationship partner at a general level. Self-esteem was assessed with a multidimensional self-esteem, and additionally, we assessed interdependent self-esteem in the Israeli sample. The offense-specific forgiveness scale was used to assess benevolence. This means conciliation and goodwill for the offender, and resentment avoidance. This means retaliation and avoidant motivation. We computed actor-partner interdependence mediation models with power as predictor, self-esteem as mediator, and forgiveness as outcome. We tested for the moderating role of sex, but there were no sex effects. The effects were treated identically for women and men. Continuous errors are intrapersonal or actor effects. Power was positively related to one's own self-esteem, and self-esteem was positively related to forgiveness. There was a direct effect of power on forgiveness, and we found a partial mediation with self-esteem. Interdependent self-esteem obtained by connectedness with others and strong social ties completely mediated the power forgiveness link. Dotted arrows are interpersonal or partner effects. Actors' power was also positively related to partners' motivation to forgive. Altogether, experiencing power was found to be beneficial for a healthy relationship. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robert. Okay, moving on to our penultimate talk. It's not the same for all. Associations between personality states and affect depend on people's personality traits.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Sarah Kritzler. I'm a PhD student at Ruhr University Bochum in Germany, and today I'm going to talk about interactions between personality traits and personality states. So our general research question was whether associations between personality states and positive affect depended on people's personality traits. This is, for example, often examined in the extroversion domain, where the question then would be, does the association between state extroversion and positive affect depend on people's levels of trait extroversion? A series of lab experiments actually examined this by manipulating state extroversion in a series of group discussions, and they did not find any evidence for trait-state interactions at all. Instead, both rather introverted and rather extroverted persons reported more positive effect when behaving extrovertedly. However, some recent experience sampling studies reported such trait-state interactions and thereby challenged this predominant view that there are no interactions at all when looking at positive effect. And because even in these recent ESM studies, they did not all find interactions, but only some, we decided to have a look at this. We also did not only look at extroversion, but at all big 5 personality dimensions. We also used the experience sampling method. We had 2 different samples to be able to replicate our findings, and we used moderated multi-level polynomial regressions to model these associations between personality traits, personality states, and state effect. Because these were polynomial regressions, the personality trait could interact either with a linear coefficient of the personality state, with a squared coefficient of the personality state, or even with both. And if we look at our findings, we did indeed find significant trait-state interactions for openness, agreeableness, and extroversion, but not for conscientiousness and emotional stability. These significant interactions also replicated in a second sample, with the exception that trait extroversion in the first sample interacted with the squared coefficient of state extroversion, and in the second sample with the linear coefficient. But in both samples, we had significant interactions in the extroversion domain. You can see here on the right what these interactions looked like at the example of agreeableness. We have state agreeableness levels on the bottom on the x-axis. We have positive effect on the y-axis. And we can see how the association changes with increasing trait levels as indicated here on top. You can see that in both samples, this association became stronger with increasing trait levels, which reflects a positive interaction between trait and state agreeableness. You can also see, which was our third main finding, that the relative strength of the interactions, how much this line changes with increasing trait levels, differed between the 2 studies. In study 1, interactions were generally stronger than in study 2, but in both cases, these interactions were significant. Generally, I'd like you to take away that these trait-state interactions may be more common than we previously thought, but maybe we just need high-powered experience sampling studies to find them, because these interactions tend to be quite small, but could still be impactful. Future research should thus try to integrate these interactions more often and further examine how strong and impactful they are. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. My email is here at the bottom, and you can also find me at the conference. Thank you so much for your attention, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Sorry, I unmuted myself already. Thank you so much, Sarah. Okay, our final talk of the session, the relationship between narcissism and problematic social networking sites used among Chinese college students.
Hello, everyone. I'm Shanglin Ho, a PhD student from East China Normal University in Shanghai. Currently, I'm a visiting PhD student at the University of Edinburgh. Today, I would like to give a presentation. The title is The Relationship Between Narcissism and Problematic Social Networking Sites Use Among Chinese College Students. Problematic social networking sites use refers to addictive-like symptoms and lack of social networking sites use-related self-regulation, leading to impaired personal and social data life functioning. Researchers have started studying the risk factors behind this problematic behavior. One of them is narcissism. However, past research has mainly focused on the direct relation between narcissism and problematic social networking sites use. Less is known about the underlying mechanisms. The interaction of person-affector cognition execution model proposes that problematic internet use results from the interaction between predisposing variables, affector and cognitive responses, and executive functions. Specifically, predisposing variables are risk factors that may lead users to excessively use particular internet applications. Affective and cognitive responses variables may mediate the relationship between predisposing variables and problematic social networking sites use. According to this model, narcissism could be viewed as a predisposing variable. Social comparison falls into the affective and cognitive responses category. Thus, the present study aims to explore the relationship between narcissism and problematic social networking sites use, and whether this link is mediated by social comparison or retention. Participants were 1,349 Chinese college students who completed the measures assessing narcissism, social comparison orientation, problematic social networking sites use. The data were performed by SPSS and M+. We used the structural equation modeling to test the mediation model. We found that narcissism was positively related to problematic social networking sites use, and this positive link was mediated by ability comparison, but not opinion comparison. These findings indicated that the effects of narcissism and problematic social networking sites use depending on the two types of social comparisons. Expanding our understanding of narcissism and social comparison orientation in the context of problematic social networking sites use. That's all my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, so we do have a few minutes for questions. Hanji, do we have any questions for the panel?
Yes, we do. So the first question that we have is for Eva. Are similar patterns of perceived control observed before and after separation, divorce, and death of a partner across participants with diverse SES?
Thank you very much for this question. Actually, our study was only based on individuals from Germany. Also, the SEP is a very heterogeneous study. We examined changes, age and gender effects, and found on average that the effects were slightly stronger in women compared to men, but we did not explicitly examine the role of ethnicity.
Okay, thank you. So the next question is for Jeremy. Can you talk about the similarities and differences between your results and those from the Moral Foundation questionnaire?
My results are quite consistent with the Moral Foundation's questionnaire, which research with that tends to show that moral foundations of fairness and authority and loyalty tend to be more correlated with conservatism, which is also consistent with the idea that if the world is fundamentally hierarchical, then we should be loyal to the people that are in top and in charge. The hierarchy is fair, so we shouldn't be too quick to try to change the ways that things are right now. So I think it's quite consistent with height stuff and also with research on authoritarianism. It's just not consistent with the idea that conservatives see the world as a more dangerous place than liberals. Thank you. It's a great question.